On behalf of the Product Development and Management Association, I would like to welcome you to today's webcast, Driving Innovation in Your Portfolio. These webcasts are hosted by the Product Development and Management Association. PDMA is the world's largest professional organization of new product development professionals. You can find more information about PDMA at www.pdma.org. Here is today's moderator, Mark Hart.
Today is November the 15th, 2012. I want to welcome everyone to today's webcast, Driving Innovation in Your Portfolio. I'm Mark Hart. I've been contributing to new product development efforts for nearly 30 years. My company's name is OpLaunch. I'm a PDMA volunteer, and I'm a PDMA certified new product development professional. Our presenter today is David Matheson. David is the co-founder of SmartOrg, which helps senior management improve their results from portfolio management and product development. David earned his PhD from Stanford University. He currently teaches strategic portfolio management and related topics at the Stanford Center for Professional Development. He is the co-author of the book, The Smart Organization, Creating Value Through Strategic R&D. He's authored articles on innovation, portfolio management, and decision-making. Today is a very special webcast. David will be sharing from his Driving Innovation in Your Portfolio lab at the PDMA Product Innovation Management Conference last month. David, welcome to today's webcast.
Thank you. I'm glad to be here.
David, I'm looking forward to learning about the insights from your Driving Innovation in Your Portfolio laboratory session last month. It'll be great to see how you've consolidated those insights into your webcast today.
I have been on a kind of career quest for a while to understand what makes innovation work. I started my career at Xerox PARC, which famously invented the future and failed to capitalize on it. And what I learned in there is that a great technology and a compelling customer insight is necessary but not sufficient to change the world. And so a question I have is, what's missing? And I think a piece of this has to do with how we evaluate and how we analyze our projects and our portfolios. SmartOrg, my company, provides software and services that help companies find their most profitable projects. Companies like HP use us deeply in innovation, and we've helped them launch many new businesses. And companies like Dow AgroScience use us across their portfolio to prioritize projects and to set portfolio strategy. I've broadly been in this business since about 1986. Now, one phenomenon I've noticed, and I've done a number of surveys on, but here's an example, is that most companies don't have enough innovation in their portfolio. And by enough, they mean in their own judgment. And here's a little thought experiment you can try for yourself. Think about your own portfolio and whether you have too few or too many incremental projects. Now, by incremental projects, I mean things that are short-term or more particularly things that fit into your current way of doing business. They're not, they're fairly routine and you can just do them. And then think about whether you have too many or too few innovative projects. Now by innovative, I mean the things that could be more game-changing, but more specifically anything that doesn't fit naturally into your current way of doing business. And typical results from these polls, here's one I've done of about 50 companies, say that about 60% of the companies have too few innovative companies, and about 90% of the companies have too many incremental ones. And yet they want more innovative projects, and they want fewer incremental ones. So why is it that companies can't fulfill their intentions? And what do we need to do differently to drive more innovation in the portfolio and achieve that growth we're all looking for? So I had a great opportunity to chair a lab on driving innovation in portfolio management at the PDMA conference last month. And the one thing about these labs is that these are interactive, collaborative environments, at least the ones I'm involved in, where a group of companies comes together who has these problems, has these issues, and really explores them and develops them and tries to understand. And I've learned a number of things from this lab that I want to share with you today. Now, to make something like this work, we've got about 30 companies here that participated. They're guided by thought leaders with tons of experience. So I'm certainly in this kind of category as the chairman, and we had a good variety of perspectives here to really bring this home. So Rich Duncombe in the upper left, he's an innovator, and he's personally been involved in the launch of about 35 new businesses, about half of them successful. So he's got the successes and the battle scars to really understand what's going on. The three folks across the diagonal, Ash Bumbla, Christopher Morrison, and Matt Wasserman, are stars in the portfolio management movie. These guys have all had many years of working with portfolios on one way or another, from a technology point of view, or from a line point of view, or a financial point of view, trying to drive innovation in their own companies. And so in a way, they're kind of owners or stars in the movie. And in the lower right, we have Carrie Niles from PlanView, who is more in the vendor consulting community, and like me, has seen the movie many times, although never started it herself. And so we have these different perspectives coming together and really developing a good interaction around this. So first, let's just sort of get a sense of this audience here. And I have this poll, and I would like to just understand where people are in terms of our audience. Are you a consultant or vendor? That is, you've seen the movie many times. Are you a kind of participant involved in your company's portfolio or process, although you don't really own it? Maybe you have a minor role. Or are you an owner with a real leading or star role in your portfolio, either from a staff point of view, that is, you own the process, or maybe you're accountable for the results it produces. That would be more of a line perspective. And then other, and I don't know what that would be exactly. So the results are coming in here. And they're still jumping around a bit, but we can see about 45% of you are participants. That's the largest category. About 30% of you are owners in one way or another, and about 15% of you are consultants, vendors, have seen the movie many times. So that's great, and I would encourage you to bring your perspective to the discussion. Now, what we found in these interactive events is it's kind of not enough to just bring your perspective. What we also found is it's important to people be bringing problems. That is, trying to understand what the issues really are. So this is not an abstract discussion about how to drive innovation in your portfolio. It's a concrete one driven by real examples, real problems, real solutions. And a way of helping you guys into that experience and participating as much as possible, I would invite each of you to just take a moment and think about, what are you trying to accomplish in your portfolio with regard to driving more innovation? Be specific, be real. If you would like, and there's a chat box at the bottom, feel free to type something in, and we'll just get a sense of what some people are thinking about. But if you don't want to, that's fine too. So having taken a moment, let's just do a little poll. And I want to get a sense of how invested or how committed, what is the nature of the problem or the scale of the problem. And so I've just made this little scale from 1 to 7. You can pick anything from 1 to 7. 1 means I'm just curious, don't really have a problem, don't intend on much, and I'm just happy to be here. 2 would be a little more serious and curious. 3 would be more opportunistic, puts you in a kind of refinement mode. You're looking, you got some issues, and if you pick up a good idea, you'll implement or maybe recommend it depending on your role in the company. 5 is more serious still, 6 is more serious, and 7 means you're active. You've got a number of issues, and you really want to improve innovation in your portfolio. So the results are coming in here, and I think they're settling down a bit. So you can see most folks are opportunistic to active, and we can see a whole bunch of things floating through the chat. I think there are more than fit there, but how do you increase new to the company ideas? How do you fill the pipeline? How do you figure out which ideas are the right ones and get the company to move forward, portfolio management more broadly, and so on. So great. So I would hold those things in mind, and at the end we'll come back because there are a number of suggestions and insights that came out of this session that hopefully will give you some thoughts about what you want to do next in your situation. The kinds of things you guys are saying are quite typical of the sorts of things that were being talked about in the session. So what we learned, there's a picture of me on the left introducing one of our sessions on the portfolio simulation. What we learned is 4 significant points. First of all, where you invest matters much more than how much you invest. People often believe that they're underfunded, and that's probably true in many cases, but the issue isn't so much funding as where you put the money and how you manage it. Second, you should use something called an agile, we're calling an agile portfolio process. This really is based on the fundamental insight that the thing stopping people is generally the barriers that are set up in organization by processes that are too rigid or designed for different purposes, and so you need more agility. Third idea is that innovation is hard and ambiguous, and you need to be doing stuff that's big enough and worthwhile enough to really make a difference, to get attention, and to drive results. So just little ideas fragmented all over actually doesn't do very much for anybody. But how do you put them together into real innovation platforms is critical. And lastly is there's a real need to think more critically about strategic and economic issues around innovation. This is an area that systematically people seem to have a problem with more innovative ideas. So one of the exercises we did, we took our 30 companies and we divided them up based on recent success. So here they're labeled green, yellow, and red. Green means these are companies where innovation actually seems to be working and driving growth to exceed the growth goals in the innovation. Yellow companies are companies that are holding their own through innovation, but they're not really hitting their growth as much as they'd like, although they're not really in decline either. And red companies are companies that are declining in spite of their innovation effort. And one of the great things about a workshop like this is that you can compare and contrast different things very quickly. So we call this the myths and realities of portfolio management. So what people did is they wrote down stuff that they have done or that they attribute to their success or failure in the last few years. And they're color-coded by what kind of company you are. And they put them up. They're written here on these hexagons, which are giant Post-its, really. And there's a whole bunch of stuff here around spending level, which is the orange one is the label on spending level. And just to draw your attention to 2 of the red ones here, one company increased their spending in R&D and are in decline, and another company decreased its spending in R&D and are in decline. And basically what all these hexagons say is that while spending matters, it's not really the main determinant of success from innovation. It's, as said another way, it's more important where you spend it than how much you spend if your goal is to ultimately drive growth and create new wealth for your company. So here's a little exercise that we did, which I'll try to do quickly with you guys to give you a sense of, of what this means. Here's something called an innovation screen. It's looking at the risk and return in a portfolio. The vertical axis is a measure of difficulty, understood here to mean probability of success. So that is, easy projects are towards the top, and hard projects are towards the bottom. The x-axis is the value or the impact of the project. You could think of this in terms of net present value, assuming it succeeds, or perhaps revenue as a proxy for that. But just, what's the financial impact of the project? And on the left, we have small projects, and on the right, we have big ones. Now, this creates 4 sort of conceptual categories. On the upper left, we have bread and butter projects. Some of the examples of bread and butter projects that came up on the workshop are things like customer requests, line extensions, things like that. Going diagonally across, but those are easy but small. Going diagonally across, you have the Oyster projects. These are hard, but if they work, they're big. So examples that people came up with are things like new channels, new technologies, maybe new market segments. On the upper right, these are easy and big. These are the pearls. This is what everybody wants. Current products in new markets, as an example sometimes, maybe some blending brands, creating new platforms, these sorts of things. Particularly something like a new platform when it's proven out. So sometimes oysters over time become pearls, although sometimes oysters over time don't have pearls. and can move the other way and become white elephants. White elephants are hard and small, and some of the examples given here are responding too quickly to customer requests, following competition, supporting heritage products, these sorts of things. Now, in the session, we did kind of a full look at where people's portfolios stood, but we'll do a simplified version here and just look at big versus small. So this vertical line is the line of significance. That is, to the right, these projects are big, and to the left is small. So what makes something significant? And we have a rule of thumb based on the idea that something significant, if the board of the company would put this on a list of things they might look at, as opposed to a list, a portfolio that people are going to manage for them. They have some visibility to the specific projects. Now, by board, I don't literally mean a board. I mean whatever is the governing group of whatever part of the organization you're in, the board of the group or organization. So here's a little exercise, thought experiment you can try. For you, how much potential does a project need to be significant? So first of all, think about your organization of concern. You may be representing an entire company. You may be thinking of a division of a company. You may have a portfolio which represents a particular area within the company, an area of interest or concern. So just whatever that is, think about that for a moment. And then say, well, how big is that unit that I'm trying to support? This is easiest to do in terms of revenue. And again, if you're a full company, this may be just a number you look up or a division. If it's something smaller, just do an allocation and try to get some kind of approximation to that. So then take 10% of that number. That's what this board should pay attention to. So you should have a number here that's some sense of scale of significance. Now the question is, how many projects have the potential to exceed this target? So I've got a little poll here on what fraction of your portfolio is significant. Let me just open this up here. So if you think about your whole portfolio, is it 0 to 20% that's significant? Is it 20 to 40% that's significant? Is it 40 to 60, 60 to 80, or 80 to 100? So just do a rough guess of where you stand. I should say for those of you who have process improvements and things like that, you need to think in terms of net present value instead of revenue. And the comparison point for net present value is market capitalization. And so you have to sort of allocate market capitalization. That's a harder thing to do. But for those of you working on that, you might think that way. So here are the results. And you can see that over half of our participants are in the 40% and less. And well, I guess it's about a third 0 to 20, about a third 20 to 40, and about a third in the 60 to 80 category. So you can see there's a lot of projects going on that aren't significant. And that's kind of a good starting point for this. And let me show you an example of now a company analyzed. We did this exercise. This is an analysis I've done with another company. It's a 6-division public company looking at their 80 most important projects. So it's a little bit more comprehensive than you can do in a quick exercise. But they had approximately 60% bread and butter, 20% white elephant, 10% oysters, and 10% pearls. So they're at about 80% of their projects are insignificant. Now that's okay, because if you're serving immediate customer needs, those incremental easy ones, the bread and butters, are actually pretty important. However, taken together, this is a portfolio that is driving out innovation just by virtue of being clogged. In other words, our cups are running over, and with the wrong projects. There's an ancient Zen story of a man who goes to learn from the master, and they're serving tea, and the master just keeps pouring tea into the guy's cup. He says, well, why are you doing that? And the master replies, I can't teach you anything until you empty your cup first. And I think this is a basic principle. We're actually all so busy with our portfolio, and indeed some of our sense of self-worth comes from being involved in activity. And we just keep pouring and fill up the portfolio. And most of the stuff being poured in is incremental because it's easy and it's obvious. And so people do it and they keep busy and they feel good about their work, but they forget to ask the significance question. And so that has the effect of crowding out the possibility of innovation. So following your kind of routine, or it's just human nature. There's nothing judgmental about this. It's just that it's human nature, and you've got to be alert for it and always ask the significant question. So what can you do to shift your investment around to just make room for innovation? Well, ultimately it boils down to focusing on oysters. The pearls are relatively easy because everybody loves them. The question is, where do those come from? And they generally come from oysters. So the first thing, look at that 20% in the white elephant category. A lot of that is just waste. They're projects that should probably be killed. In other circumstances, those are projects that have been dumbed down. So there's a real tendency to drive towards mediocrity. That is, you have a great idea, but to get it through your approval processes, you have to make it fit. And that generally lowers aspirations and makes projects smaller. So you can also take some projects which are great ideas, struggling to get out of little ones, and refocus them. So that moves resources from the white elephant category to the oyster category. And you can see here increasing the oyster category. Now, I'm not so naive as to believe you're going to get rid of 100% of them, but maybe you can get it down to 5% or something more manageable. The next thing you can do to improve this is to go after some of those bread and butter projects. Many of those projects don't need to be done, and there's a huge complexity in maintaining a lot of the immediate requests. I have seen many portfolios where you can get 25 to 40% reduction in projects because there's just a whole lot of stuff in there, and while it's good, it's kind of not really worth doing when you consider the opportunity cost of the oysters that are being prevented from occurring. So being willing to walk away from something small is important, even though that's a good idea. More on this later, by the way. And the last thing you need to do is to change how you develop your oysters, because you want to get more pearls. And this boils down to learning rapidly and failing cheaply. That is, creating metrics around learning and driving oysters for experimentation rather than for results. And more on that later. But this is essentially how where you invest matters a lot. And the kind of patterns we have tend to drive investment in the wrong directions. And you need to be vigilant about that. So that was the first insight. Where you invest matters more than how much you invest. Next insight is around using an agile portfolio process. And there you can see a picture of Matt Wasserman writing on the flip chart there, summarizing a group's insights in another exercise. So a lot of kind of give and take and discussion in this event. Now this starts with actually sort of a point of confusion. So what is portfolio management? Portfolio management is one of these massively overused words, and I have found that there are basically three locuses of meaning. And these are actually really different business problems. They're related, and what's quite confusing is that people in these communities tend to use a very similar vocabulary to describe what are essentially different things. But here are the basic locuses of meanings. Let me start over here on the left. This is the what of portfolio management. This is fundamentally an economic question. It's about prioritization, it's about evaluation, it's about strategy. When you're looking at the what question, you might consider doubling or tripling the budgets of projects, or canceling them entirely, or completely reframing them. In contrast, in the who area, this is fundamentally a kind of resourcing question. And it's fairly tactical. Who is assigned? What budget levels do you have? How do you conflict? How do you resolve conflicts when two projects collide? One thing about the who area, you can tell the difference, is that often the budgets aren't in radical flux. That is, you assume the project plans are more or less given. You're certainly refining them and adjusting them and tweaking them. But when you're over on the what side, they might be radically in question. there's another slight point of overlap. The resource side of the what question is essentially constraint management. Do we have enough, let's say marketers or technical people, and what are we going to do about it is kind of a what question. However, if you know you don't have enough marketers or technical people or whatever, how do you assign what you have is really a who question. And the last locus of meaning is around how. This is the governance part, the process, the milestones, the gates, the reviews, and so on, the nitty-gritty of actually managing projects, making it happen, keeping it on track. And so you could look at the how and the who as a way of thinking of portfolio management as kind of project management, but bigger and more complicated. All three very important views. The punchline is, and one of the things we found, is that some of the best practices in some of these areas actually undermine other ones. And so there's a kind of tension between these things. And in particular, this tension strongly inhibits innovation. So we did an exercise around comparing how companies accomplish these functions, and then what is the impact of innovation. And so you can see a couple examples here, and pretty much all participants got to review and discuss and contribute to all of these. But here's an example from the who dimension. This is sort of the resourcing, assignments, budget, conflict piece, the more tactical one. And first of all, people just shared under this column describe, what do we actually do? How do we deal with this issue in portfolio management? And so people have spreadsheets on capacity, and they get together and have management meetings, and they have resource managers, and there's all kinds of things that people do in there. And we said, okay, now looking at those things, what are the implications for the more innovative projects, in particular the kind of oysters that people are trying to get more of? And a lot of discussion and sharing about what goes wrong given these best practices, and sometimes what goes right. And then lastly, if we think of these as unintended consequences of something, we imagine or design what we would need to do to make more innovation thrive. And so we did that on all the dimensions, the who and the what and the how, and find that there really are some kind of fundamental things that you have to pay attention to. So for example, you may assign and tell people to go pursue oyster projects and have, make a decision and have full intention of making that happen. But when it gets down to the nitty-gritty of resourcing, when there's conflict between projects, the resourcing issues hurt the oyster projects more than the bread and butter projects, because usually the bread and butter projects are attached to people or customers or things with more power, or they're more simple. And so even in spite of any kind of system, there's this like relentless pressure that just hurts the oyster projects and makes companies less effective at delivering more innovation. This is an example of a sort of general principle, which is to get more innovation. The job is mostly to remove the barriers. That is, organizations are perfectly designed to deliver the results they're currently getting. Trying harder actually often doesn't work. And people have been trying harder on innovation for 5 or 10 years with very mixed results. But it's actually the unintended consequences that are causing a lot of the issues. And in particular, the unintended consequences of best practices. So I'd like you to think for a moment, and I would invite you, if you'd like to put some things in the chat. What best practice do you do that has the most dire unintended consequences for innovation generally and oyster projects more specifically? I can see a couple of you are typing things in. I would encourage all of you to think about this for yourself, whether or not you type something in. I'm going to give you some examples of some of the things that came up in the session. So common elements of best practices and unintended consequences. I can see Somya has already said stage gate methodology, and that's probably the #1 issue. Stage gate process, people put this several ways, but I think the most simple way of looking at this is that it gives you 1,000 ways to say no. Now, not that the stage gate is bad, it's just misapplied. People realize that the stage gate process is essentially a deployment process. It's a quality deployment process to make sure you accomplish what you intend to accomplish. but it's not a learning process. And in spite of the literature that has a sort of phase 0 or phase 1 that says, figure out what you want to do, the whole model is basically wrong. Innovation is not a funnel. It's something more expansive, and it gets in the way a lot. Someone else writes decision by committee. That's certainly very much part of stage gate. Defining requirements up front rather than discovering them. There's a great example there about making and following plans, which tends to get people focused on activity, not on learning, and really learning is at the heart of innovation. So you've got to discover as you go. Some other ones that are kind of interesting, holding people accountable, which seems like good practice, actually causes people to lower their aspirations. And the harder the punishment and the more accountable you hold them, the lower the aspirations go. The whole idea of mitigating risk, people talk about uncertainty as if it's a bad thing, and actually uncertainty is your friend, because the innovation is all about discovering upside. And if you're focused completely on mitigating risks, you're not focused on what you create. I once took an advanced driving course, a skid course, and one of the things I learned is that if your car's going sideways or backwards or something horrible, your body will tend to steer the car towards whatever you're looking at. What this means is if you look at the telephone pole that you're afraid of hitting, you're going to hit it. What you need to do is look at the opening in the road where you want to go, even if it's behind you or off to your side, and it works like magic. And so this whole idea of failure as being bad, and it really takes attention away from creating what we want. Business case analysis is a pretty interesting one. There's nothing, in a way, wrong with the analysis per se, except that because of the kinds of assumptions people make or the inability to treat uncertainty in there, it essentially lowers the credibility of an innovative product. The idea of getting the data favors Me Too and bread and butter projects because those projects have good data. And interestingly, driving strategy creates incrementalism. And the great innovations generally occur at the edge of strategy. So maybe just to put this all together, it's a way of saying, and I think we all recognize this, that innovation is hard. What people think success looks like is a straight line. What success really looks like is a wiggly line. And the problem with many of our processes is that they're designed based on planning and reasonable assumptions and predictability, and these things are just all kind of incorrect. And I think if I could summarize the barriers together in when there are many variations, and you guys have put a lot of them on the chat log, but it's essentially that too much focus on execution inhibits learning. Here's another example of this myths and realities one. And notice that a number of the red hexagons, these are the companies that are having trouble, have been doing a lot with project management. And the companies that are doing well, these are a little harder to read, are being more agile. They're focusing more on prioritization, transparency, learning, these kinds of things. So project management efforts do not correlate with successful innovation, but agile approaches do. And they have a focus on learning, that is on proof points, not on milestones. So this makes a distinction between work and proof. Proof is what you need to know to believe something's going to work out. So ask yourself a question like, what would I want to know before I'd be willing to mortgage my house to fund this project? That'll give you some evidence to go after. That's a proof point. What people typically do is they work on the thing that is the milestone or has the greatest amount of work in it. So if you've got a product with a complex supply chain, you might dive down the supply chain path pretty quickly because it takes a lot of work. Chances are it's not what's going to make or break the project. Another key element of these agile approaches is they have a lot of transparency and a lot of clear prioritization, clear shared reasons about what's important, what's not. So these are some elements that are in this kind of agile approach. Another way of looking at this is to expand our thinking about what a portfolio process means. An agile process helps teams discover the most valuable opportunities. So most people, when they think of their portfolio, emphasize this dimension of it over on the right about selecting the best projects. That's periodic and comparative and tends to be focused on executives who need to balance return and strategy against risk and cost. And that's all good. However, that sets up a bunch of hoops or barriers that a project needs to overcome. It also creates a mentality of a sort of database mentality. Oh, just define a bunch of metrics and we'll measure everything on them, and then we'll know what to do. But those are all inhibitions or preventers in the way of innovation. So we need something that does this that's sort of lighter weight. What innovation needs is more help. And another aspect of the portfolio process is that it helps teams make a project be the best it can be. This tends to be iterative and ongoing and focused on project teams who tend to be working through a sort of triangle. Objectives: what is our target? Evaluation: is that worth doing? And planning: how do we actually make that happen? And teams need to kind of iterate on these questions as they go, and they often need help doing it. So the portfolio process in the agile form is more focused on the creation or construction of driving teams forward and gets the portfolio benefits as sort of a side benefit. So that's the agile portfolio process. Here again you can see two other thought leaders, Rich Duncombe from HP and Chris Morrison from Nowco, are leading this group in analyzing their processes, this overcoming the barriers thing. One of the next insights is about creating innovation platforms. So a lot of innovation comes in as a little idea, or they tend to be small or fragmented projects, and that leads them fighting for scraps. That is, they're not really getting the quality and focused attention or are something on the side. Why are these projects often small? And it fundamentally boils down to complacency. And this seems to be a huge issue among the companies that we dealt with. Now, but I think it's kind of fundamental. This is not a small point. That is, people feel a need to stick to their knitting. And so you get knitted light bulbs. People think that innovation, they have to be given permission or direction to do it, waiting for the CEO or maybe McKinsey to tell you what to do or to make it okay. And getting distracted. Here's someone trying to play tennis, and it's really nice to talk on the phone to your friend. Makes you feel important. You can do stuff, and it totally distracts you from the game. And so these are all forces that lead people into complacency, and it creates a lot of mediocre projects. Now, the thing about mediocre projects is that they're actually not necessarily bad. They're just easy to understand. So if you do a portfolio analysis, of which I've done a lot, here's a pretty typical view showing the range of uncertainty of a whole bunch of projects. And you can see that bottom half of the project list, that you really got to question whether it needs to be done. The first project there, the line killer, has an upside that's bigger than most of the small projects. In fact, many of them put together. And people look at their situation like, well, let's just take the shoe inserts project. That's a good project. It's hitting its milestones. It's accomplishing stuff. It meets a customer need. And it's distracting from doing the project line killer or driving the upside. So the question you have to ask in the portfolio is, what do we need to do to create more wealth or more results? Not which project should we fund. The prioritization is kind of a secondary, I mean, it's part of the conversation, but it's not actually the prime question. And so you've really got to ask yourself whether these projects are really worth doing. Because essentially, they may be distractions. They might also be important. I mean, I'm not going to judge, but you've got to ask yourself this question very seriously. So when we looked at this kind of issue, how do companies actually get innovation to be a critical mass and be of enough interest, is we looked at two areas. One is around market focus, and one is around use of platforms. And these two clusters boil down to two things. One is think beyond line extensions into platforms and get out of your comfort zone. You don't find real innovation by staying with your current customers all the time or your current technology all the time. You've got to change something that makes it interesting and different. And it's got to be a proposal that's significant. It can't be a line extension. And so we kind of compared notes, and being effective outside of the comfort zone seems to involve a couple elements. One is find an actionable insight that defines an area of interest that's outside your comfort zone. Idea management has been pretty significantly oversold. The issue is, can you find people and idea and insights that you can actually do something with? If you do have an idea management system, try to find the innovators or get them clustered into things that actually matter if you're trying to drive this new kind of innovation. So the first thing is find an actionable insight that defines an area of interest. It could be a trend, it could be a technology, it could be a customer insight. Second step, create a passionate team, and the passion here is important because these people are going to have to go outside of the normal rules of operation, and what keeps that going is passion and vision. And get them working on innovating a platform. That is, and by platform here I mean some new element or new way of doing business. It could be a technology platform, it could be a product platform. The point is it's not just a line extension. They're trying to create some kind of new business in a new area. And this team needs visibility and accountability to the top. And that's what gives an innovative idea enough horsepower to compete with the bread and butter projects and to command some kind of attention. Last point is about thinking critically about strategic and economic issues. And here we can see Karen and Alice working the myths and realities exercise with the hexagons and summarizing some points there. So an Oyster project, a good Oyster project that's big enough and interesting enough, tends to swing wildly, our group found, between paralysis by analysis and extinction by instinct. So what will happen is you'll get something with a mandate, and people will charge down that direction. And because they have permission to proceed, they don't need to go through all the hoops of building business cases and dealing with all the financial stuff because they know in a way the decisions have been made. And that undermines a project because they're not doing their critical thinking about the strategic and economic issues. And then over time, maybe they lose a little power, or somebody becomes afraid of the project, or the stage gate comes after them, and they just start having to do more and more analysis to prove their existence. And pretty soon, it just becomes totally destructive. As many of you have said in the chat log there, the paralysis by analysis starts to weigh these things down. There are speculative assumptions made, and people are on fool's errands gathering data, and so on. And there's nothing in the middle. So if you think of the work of innovation as the work of answering three questions. So I think many companies have done a lot of work on customer market need. I call this the does anybody care question. And there's whole bodies of discipline, voice of the customers and focus groups and all kinds of stuff that you can do to take an actionable insight and shape it and drive it towards an answer that people care about, going from an insight to something that's really actionable with a customer. Big body of discipline of work there. The can we do it question, this is technology or solution or design one, and this is about finding the answer, finding a way that works. And again, there are very significant bodies of work and whole disciplines around testing and prototyping and experimentation and so on that help a company answer that question and go from an idea to something that works as a reliable, deliverable product. The last area is should we do it? This is the strategic and economic value question. And this is the channel, the funding, the approach to the project, how it works as a business. And normally what companies do here is they have a spreadsheet and they make a bunch of assumptions and some kind of financial analyst puts it together, and I guess that works, but as far as I've been able to tell, the depth of discipline or the ability to drive this question forward as part of the work of innovation is pretty weak, and indeed people don't seem to recognize it very much. But I thought I'd just test that idea with another little poll here. And so think for yourself. Which is your weakest idea, weakest area? Which one do you have the greatest difficulty answering this question well and efficiently and putting a project forward? So is it can we do it? Is it does anybody care? Or is it the should we do it? So here are the results. And it looks like, there's still some voting going on, but it looks like about 60% find that the should we do it, the economic question is the weakest one. About 25%, a little rounding here, it's the customer question. And about 15% are on the technology design question. So I think these are pretty typical sorts of results. That is, there's just a pretty significant gap around making this economic thinking kind of productive and useful instead of just a barrier to innovation. And I think it's a huge area. So how do you do this? Well, there's sort of the Goldilocks principle. And you got to start with the characteristic of innovation has uncertainty and ambiguity. That is, you don't know what's going to happen, and there are a lot of ways you could take this idea. In fact, the best ideas typically have a lot of ambiguity, or said more positively, a lot of flexibility, and they face a lot of uncertainty. Said positively, they have a lot of upside. But it's all around how do you understand economic value, and in particular, how do you figure out which parts of the project most drive the economic value? Is it focusing on market segmentation? Is it designing new features? Is it managing costs? What is it that actually is going to move the ball forward? And so here are some approaches people use. In the too hot category, I think leading to paralysis by analysis, detailed financial models, right? So the CFO has some model that they've done from modeled on capital investment, and it's just way too much information requirements for what an innovation can support. So they want to do uncertainty. So Monte Carlo analysis is popular these days. You can get a PhD analyst to go do that for you, and you get this sort of overdose of distributions that many people don't know what they need. Or another thing is someone will say, you know what, you make a financial forecast, you commit to it, I'm going to hold you accountable, and that's how we're going to evaluate this project. Well, that doesn't work because it's just not enough known, and it puts too much pressure on the innovation. Here's too cold. Well, no evaluation. Oh, innovation can't be managed, let's do nothing, and we'll just follow our gut and vision. Mandates. CEO says we have to go in this area, so don't question me. And off you go. Scoring rules. This is a pretty common one where you say, all right, how is this on strategic fit and size of market and a number of questions like that. And you get a sort of figure of merit with a score. That works fine if you're trying to screen out 1,000 ideas and get the bad ones out of the way. But scoring rules actually don't work very well to guide thinking or guide projects for this problem of figuring out what's going to work. Verbal descriptions or speculative assumptions. This is the sort of, let's see, shopping is a $1 trillion market, and we have a new way of doing shopping, and if we could get 1% of that, we'd be all rich, right? This is kind of very speculative assumption. So what is the just right? And I think many companies have explored this a lot, and the body of tools and techniques seems to revolve around using ranges of uncertainty, simple ranges. What's the upside? What's the downside? What makes the upside happen? What makes the downside happen? Proof points, I talked a little bit about that earlier. What are the things you need to really learn? And then getting some sense of importance in terms of probabilities to help guide thinking. The creation of multiple alternatives. Boy, we could do this or we could do that. Let's find out which one's actually the best. And simple decision trees and contingencies. And so these are pretty clearly the kind of approaches and methods that help you think critically about strategic and economic issues in innovation. So to sum up, first of all, we have Ash Bumbla, our last thought leader here, and the portfolio diagnostic exercise. You can see him working away there. So here's what we learned. Where you invest matters more than how much you invest. Use an agile portfolio process. Create innovation platforms. And think critically about strategic and economic issues. So you all started putting in some problems and issues that you thought you'd like to address, and we did a little poll on that. But I'd like you to just reflect now on what you've just seen, and what do you think would make the biggest difference for you with respect to the issues you thought about at the beginning. So go ahead and take a moment to vote there. And I can see the votes are jumping around still, but broadcast the results. So all of these points, I think, are pretty important, and they're all getting some votes here. The biggest one is thinking critically about strategic and economic issues. Although it just switched, it may be tied with using an agile portfolio process, so they're jumping around a bit. But those two ideas, thinking critically, is making that economic analysis productive in an innovative environment. And the second one there, agile portfolio process, is about building something around learning and flexibility, and in particular removing the barriers that prevent that are created by best practices elsewhere. And the third idea here is where you invest matters more than how much you invest. That is focusing on how do you create those oysters and generate them. So thank you so much for being on the webinar. I learn a lot by chairing these sessions, and even summarizing them in a webinar like this is great for me to get the ideas kind of organized. Let me turn it over for questions.
Thank you, David. I certainly picked up some great tips and been doing some tweeting. So one of the tweets I sent was, in portfolio management, strive to be effective outside of your comfort zone. So let's go ahead and shift over to the questions layout. To submit a question, type your inquiry to the box in the lower left there. And so far we've got a question from Arash. He wants to know how prioritization in an agile portfolio is different from a regular portfolio. So he's asking for perhaps some indicators of agility and perhaps how you become more agile.
Well, so I think the portfolio management is one of these things where we all envision like being the captain of the Starship Enterprise, looking at these great screens that compare everything and tell us how we can go. And it's a wonderful vision, and it's a really important one. And this sort of focus on databases and fields and metrics is a little bit like selling the Starship Enterprise by starting with the captain's chair. The question is where that data comes from and how it's used and useful. So you've got to start with the warp engines. That is, how is this thing actually going to move forward? And so I think the thing about agility is not that those meetings wouldn't happen, but rather that you really got to look at what the teams need to drive the innovations forward and how those naturally produce the metrics. So I teach whole classes on this, but basically it boils down to you've got to get out of a justification mindset. So the most common method for portfolio management is a kind of roll-up version. So you go out to all the projects and you say, please do what you need to do to justify the project, and you're going to pitch it to me, or a committee of the great and the good, and you have to fill out these forms. So fill out a bunch of forms and explain to me why I should fund your project instead of these other ones. Well, that already creates up this kind of us-them environment and creates a lot of gaming and lying and bias and all kinds of things. The committee of the great and the good then looks at all these things in some kind of parade or some kind of fancy graphic and 6-part harmony and 4 colors, and you just get these, kind of displays. And the whole premise is a little off. The question is, who's responsible, who's vested with making these decisions? And the responsibility really starts with the project teams in a way, or whatever the equivalent is in your organization. People do tackle these problems in slightly different ways organizationally, but where is that vested? What do you need to do so those people actually use and embrace some of this economic thinking and evaluation? And what I found is that as an output of that, you get all the metrics, because the teams need them for themselves and will create them for themselves, and you get a much more honest and openness to change. I've been in situations where you can ask somebody privately, do you think we should do this project? And they'll say no. You say, well, why are you doing it? Well, because I'm supposed to. So some of the stuff is really egregious. That's probably one of the most egregious ones I've come across. But I think the agile perspective, it's a very fundamental change in perspective on what you're trying to accomplish with your portfolio process. And that's where it starts. The mechanics, I've got whole other webinars on those and be happy to talk further if you're interested in more depth, Arish. But hopefully that'll answer, get you started.
Arash also asked about references, and we're going to cover that in just a moment. But Meg has proposed the following question. Are you suggesting that we don't need stage gate at all?
No, I'm not. What I'm saying is that you need to understand what stage gate is good for and what it's not good for. It's a great deployment process. Let me give you sort of an example of this. Early in my career, I worked at AT&T, and they had a 14-step stage gate process for innovation. So 14 steps? You got to be kidding me. And I looked into it, and what I realized was that if you're going to launch something new into international communications, you better make sure it works, because they could literally, a mistake could literally bring down communications for the world and probably start some wars. So I'm pretty glad they had 14 steps, but what I realized was that it had nothing to do with innovation. It was all about quality and deployment. And I think if you look at, there's a big gap between the literature of stage gates and the reality of stage gates. And so in many cases, they have become excellent quality deployment processes, and that's great. But to use them for innovation is a big mistake, because innovation needs to be more learning-oriented. It needs to be more expansive. You could think of a great innovation actually as using a stage gate as part of what it does. So for example, if you want to launch a new business area, that's your big innovative idea, you may want to launch a product along the way. Well, you can use your stage gate to do the mechanics of launching that product, but don't mistake the product launch with the innovation or the new business you're trying to create, particularly when you're talking about pearls, right? Now, for bread and butters, those are much more plannable, and so stage gate is less biased against them and can work in many cases. Now, all that said, stage gate means a lot of different things to a lot of companies, and I'm describing a sort of version of it that I think should not be used for innovation. People have patched or fixed their stage gates, or they do things that they call stage gates that aren't really stage gates, and depending on how yours really works, you either need to keep it, get rid of it, or subsume it in something else.
Alejandro asks, how do we overcome people's biases and self-interest in maintaining their projects? Also, how do we decouple project failures from career consequences without encouraging sloth?
Yeah. Well, so a couple perspectives on that. I think with respect to people's biases and self-interest in keeping their projects alive, you have to look deeply at why they want to do that. And in many cases, they want to do it because they believe in it. And so there are really two fundamental methods. One is persuasion, and one is power. And many of our systems are really far too power-based and don't pay enough attention to the persuasion aspect. So I have been in many portfolio situations where the result of the portfolio process, by being more agile and being more gentle on people, is people will withdraw their own projects. You see, most people don't want to work on mediocre ideas either. It's just they don't believe that they're mediocre. And so a lot of our systems around, say, the project management systems and can I meet my milestones and what's my bonus set on, all that stuff tells people that what they're doing is important and worthwhile. Now, most folks in innovation aren't good economic financial people. They're there because they're technologists or market researchers, or they have some skill, and the ability to give people an experience where they can think through for themselves whether their project's actually worth doing, and give them the tools. It's a sort of empowering idea. Again, this goes along with the agile idea. Is how do you empower people so they come to the right conclusions on their own? And I find that if you do that well, you can take care of 60 to 80% of that bias. Now, there will be people who have unreasonable expectations or misguided beliefs and all of that, and there you've got to drive more with power and the delivery of evidence. So in innovation, it's great because you can just set up experiments. I called them proof points before, but okay, if you believe all that to be true, and we're all really skeptical, then we should be able to, within a few months, accomplish X. And do you agree that if we can't accomplish X, that this project's not going to make any sense? Yeah, okay. And then they either make X happen or they don't. And if they do, we're all convinced that maybe they were right after all. So I think focusing on persuasion and what it takes for someone to come to their own powerful conclusion about whether their project is worthwhile is a good line of thinking to help address that question.
Okay. Got another question from Brian. He asks, what kind of economic analysis techniques would you recommend? It's crucial to account for uncertainties and probabilities. So I'm guessing that you have a tool that you like in-house.
Well, certainly there are two dimensions to this question. One of them is sort of the methodology, which broadly goes under the heading of decision analysis. I think works really well. Like any tool, it can be over-applied or under-applied, but I put the basic elements up there, ranges of uncertainty, probabilities and proof points. This was written up in a great case study that Frost and Sullivan did on HP and how they do something called their formulation phase. So that's something I can send a link out to folks if they want to download that. It gives some more specific ideas, tools like strategy tables and tornado diagrams and learning plans. So those are sort of more applied versions of this into the innovation space. But I find those have worked pretty well. SmartOrg does work to help companies build their capability in this area, so we do offer coaching and training and also software that helps make all this happen. So our software is called Portfolio Navigator, and if you're interested in that specifically, of course we'd be delighted, but speaking as a contributor in the field, it's more about the methodology. And if you like my tool, that's great.
Okay. We had one question, and I'm sure a lot of folks would like to know how they might go from today to learn more about portfolio management, or specifically agile portfolio management. Is there a website that folks might go to?
Well, I sort of coined that term to summarize what people were saying, and I think I'm getting enough feedback that I should probably do that. Because this idea of agility in portfolio management is a critical one. There is, someone's typing in the references there is a group called Strategic Portfolio Management on LinkedIn, so that would be a good place to go. And you can see a lot about agile, but we don't use these words exactly, but the agile portfolio management idea is very much part of our software. And you can see some webinars on our website. There's one on making innovation soar, the BIRD model for innovation, and on good portfolio processes. So if you look on those kinds of things on our website, you should be able to find stuff, because we do publish a lot of content there. And if you have some questions or want to talk about this, please feel free to email me and we can get a conversation going.
Okay, thanks for that. We've got another question that says, actually, I guess we just hit that. So at the moment, you don't know of a book on agile portfolio management. Is that correct?
No, I think I got to write one, though.
Oh, okay. That's an opportunity.
Yeah, no, I said I coined it for this webinar to describe what was going on, but it's pretty clear to me, so it just needs to be kind of written up.
I'm going to move to our official closing section here, and I want to remind folks that registered attendees will receive a link to the recording, and also there'll be a reminder for a link to the handout, or you can take a moment and download the handout now by clicking on the name of the file, Driving Innovation in Your Portfolio, and then click the Save to My Computer button on your local system. I want to inform you that we have webcasts happening all the time. Our next one happens to be in a couple of weeks, and it will be focusing on design strategy and business strategy and the relationship between the two with Stephanie and Marlissa from Design Concepts, so I'm looking forward to that session. David, at this time, I'd like you to take a moment and share a closing thought with our attendees, something that perhaps they might share with their colleagues this afternoon.
Well, so I started by saying I started my career at Xerox PARC, and I realized that a great technology and a compelling customer insight are necessary but not sufficient to change the world. And so what is missing? And this is a question that I'm continuing to explore and trying to understand. And I think this seminar, this webinar, and this workshop really points to some directions of what's missing. And you could say it in a couple different ways, but really we need to get better about evaluating innovation in a portfolio in a way that you can learn as you go. So this idea of evaluation and learning kind of go hand in hand, and that's a new area in a way, or something that companies need to get better at, right? So we talked about the agile process, we talked about the critical thinking, about economic and strategic issues, but evaluating a project with respect to its ability to drive learning is just really, really important.
Okay, well, thank you for sharing that, David. So let's turn it over to Whitney.
Great, thank you, Mark. And also thank you, David. This webcast is brought to you by the Product Development and Management Association and SmartOrg. On behalf of our moderator, Mark Hart, and our speaker, David Matheson, and the PDMA, thank you for joining us today.